business cycle and output gap. Business cycles is the short-term fluctuations of actual real GDP, okay? And output gap is the difference between actual and potential output, which is Y and YP. Okay, output gap is this, and output gap in percentile is Y minus YP over YP. The denominator is YP, remember. In output gap, we have recessionary gap and we have inflation gap. Okay, in recessionary gap, it is the Y equilibrium or current actual GDP less than potential real GDP. Okay, and then we have an excess of supply. Demand is low in recessionary gap, okay? Next is inflation gap, which is the current actual GDP. I'll copy this part. Current actual GDP larger than potential real GDP, okay? Current real GDP. We have an excess demand here, and demand for products or factors is rising. Demand for factors is low. Let me explain this part, okay? So when we are in the recessionary gap, we already have excess supply, which means our inventory is building up, okay? So we want to produce less. That's why our demand for factors is low. That's our demand for labor is low, and our demand for raw materials is low, okay? Next, in inflation gap, we have an excess demand about our products. Therefore, our inventory is decreasing. We want to produce more, right? So our demand for production factors like labor and raw materials is rising, is increasing, okay? Here is the recession gap where the YE equilibrium output is less than potential output, okay? Here we have an inflation gap where YP is less than Y equilibrium, okay? Tips: distinguish recessionary gap and inflation gap. Moving on, output gap and unemployment. 4.1, equilibrium and the natural unemployment rate is the unemployment rate when the economy is at potential output YP, okay? YE equals YP means unemployment rate equals natural unemployment rate. Here we have Econ's law, and I need you to remember this formula here because it will happen in the exam. It might happen in the exam, okay? It changes in the unemployment rate from differences between the growth rate of Y and the growth rate of YP, okay? So delta unemployment rate equals negative 0.5 times growth rate of YG minus, GY, minus growth rate of YP, GYP, okay? Look at this example. According to Econ's law, if the unemployment rate is 6%, and natural unemployment rate is 7%, then actual Y must be what if the government wants to close it should. Okay, so delta U equals negative 1/2 times growth of the GDP minus growth of the potential GDP, and delta U is negative 1% equals 1/2 GYP, so GY minus GYP equals 2%. Okay, so we have a inflationary gap because the actual GDP's growth rate is higher than the potential GDP's growth rate. So it's 2% above the YP growth rate. A or B, C, D is wrong. And we should what? It's something about the fiscal policy. We will talk later. So to close this gap, we need to increase tax to so that people want to spend less, and then we won't have an inflationary gap. This is A. This part you will see in later chapters. Okay, so don't worry if you don't know about this.